So now that we have the basic form of our model complete, we are ready to jump in and start sculpting on this piece. So this is largely going to follow the same sculpting process as we did for our unique prop. We're going to come in, we're going to sculpt all our major forms using dynamic topology. We're going to re-topologize the model, and then we're going to come in and finish up our sculpt, adding in some lost detail and doing any high resolution surface detailing that you may choose to have for this model. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, I don't think that I need my bounding box anymore because my form is already complete and I'm not going to be changing the scale of this. So I'm just going to hide it. I'm also going to pull my actual model outside of my utilities collection so I can collapse it, and let's name our model, instead of plane, because that is no longer descriptive, let's name it character. And you can name it whatever you want. If your character has a name or anything, feel free to name it whatever you want. I'm just going to name it character. Okay, so from this piece here, I am going to jump into Sculpt Mode. And before I even enable dynamic topology, I am going to sort of fix some of the proportion issues that were being caused by using the skin modifier. So let's do this with symmetry on, and let's use the grab brush here, and a fairly large brush size, and I'm just going to start fixing some of these proportion issues, especially in the head region. So I'm just going to come in the orthographic view and just start trying to pull these out so they match my reference a little bit better and look a little bit more natural in 3D as well. And I think in order to really get these fixed, I may need to add a subdivision surface modifier to this piece in order to really get the shapes correct. So obviously I want the head to come more straight down, not be sticking out quite so much. Something like that. And I'm just going to come in the shoulders and this and fix this area. The proportion guide I used is sort of a generic humanoid form here. I'm going to deviate from this somewhat in order to achieve the final look that I want. And one of those deviations I'm going to make is I'm going to give this character a little bit more of a belly and put a little bit more of the character's mass towards the bottom of the torso because I think it looks cute. I need to pull out, his torso itself is a little thin in the Y direction, so I need to pull that out. I need to pull out a little bit more mass in the back of the shoulders so we get more of that flower sac shape that's really common in cartoon characters. I'm going to pull the armpits up a little bit. And obviously the legs need a lot of work. Okay, I'm going to come in with the inflate brush to fix some of the tapering issues with the legs. Now, because all of these sculpting techniques are pretty much the same as what we've gone over so far, I'm not going to spend quite as much time on explanation for this portion. It's largely going to be demonstration. So if there's anything that I'm doing that seems that you're not familiar with, I would go back and watch the previous videos where I sculpt, because I do a little bit more explanation in those videos. Okay. Fingers look okay right now. The feet need some work. Let's get the grab brush and make sure that these look okay. There's a little bit of a pinching issue here. There's a little bit of a pinching issue here in this toe region. I think it's going to be okay because we are going to use dynamic topology, so these edges should collapse when I come over it with dynamic topology. But if they don't, we'll address that when we get there. Okay, so those are the major proportional edits that I wanted to make. So I'm just going to apply the subdivision surface modifier so I don't lose any of that information. And now we are ready to come in and sculpt with our dynamic topology here. So make sure that symmetry is on, of course, and let's pull up our active tool settings so that we can see all them right here. We can also expand our dynamic topology section, which will just give us this same menu, but we can have it up here all the time if we so choose. Okay, so I took a little screenshot of my reference image right here. So this is obviously not going to be a human character, so we are going to make some changes from this more generic human scale reference here, and that's largely going to be in the mouth and the ear area. So I'm going to start by probably sculpting in this sort of more snout-like face. So let's get started with that. Again, I'm not necessarily going for a one-to-one recreation of this character. This is a character I had made previously for a personal project, and I just want something along these lines. Okay, so that's roughly going to be the snout form. We obviously need to come in and clean up around it. Right, because this is going to be the chin right here, so we don't want a double chin necessarily. The eyes are going to go about here, and then the brow is going to go about here. Looks kind of like an alien at this stage, but that's okay. And we're going to have some cheeks right here. And then, of course, the ears are going to be about here. Let's just pull out a little bit of form for the ears. And I'm just using the draw brush at the moment, using a combination of drawing in the positive and negative directions by holding Control and the Shift key to smooth out certain areas. Okay, so that's a pretty good basic shape. So let's just go in and continue to refine this. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit to get a slightly smaller detail size in my dynamic topology here. And maybe switch to the crease brush and just give this a little bit more definition. And same thing around the ears. We want them a little bit more defined from the rest of the body, or I should say the head. I'm going to pull these out a little bit more and then push the fronts of them in using the grab brush to get more of that ear shape going. Okay, so let me start just sketching out very loosely where I want the features to be. So let's give them two little nostrils right there. And it should have a large sort of upper lip portion to make it look like a monkey. Let's push these out a little bit. And I'm just going to fix some of the tapering in the head is getting a little strange. So I'm just going to use the grab brush to fix my proportions. I always use the grab brush when I'm having proportional issues. I just find it gives the best results. So I want the eyes to be kind of a low set and far apart. So I'm just gonna pull these out here and then come in and fix whatever issues I'm having using the draw brush. Something sort of like that. We want to push in a little bit here for the sockets, but not too much because it'll start to lose that kind of more cartoony quality, and it might start to look kind of creepy. Okay, I'm going to come in with the inflate brush around the neck because it's starting to pinch in a little bit too much. So I'm using the inflate and the smooth brush here just to get this shape a little bit stronger, a little bit more solid. And I'm coming in over the head with the inflate brush at a fairly zoomed in distance to just up-res it a little bit so that it matches the rest of the body. I think I want the face to be a little bit more flat as well, so I'm going to come in with the grab brush and a fairly large brush size and just really gently pull this back in. So we're not going to be adding too much detail to the body or anything like that. We're going to keep the features more or less how they are to maintain that sort of cartoonish quality, but I am going to come over a really light pass with the inflate brush just to up-res it so it gets a little bit smoother. So if you just use a combination of the inflate brush a little bit and then you come in and hold shift with the smooth brush, you end up with relatively the same volume mesh that you had to begin with, but now you just have a little bit more subdivision to work with here. And then the same thing with the legs. Again, we're not going to be really adding much detail to these, but I do want to up-res them a little bit. See, we've kind of mangled our feet here. So because when I'm coming over the feet, I'm actually losing resolution. That means my dynamic topology detail size is not low enough. So let's set this down to 6 for this area. And you can see we have a much, now when we come over it with the inflate brush, we aren't losing anything. So we need to pay a little special attention to this area because of that issue we were having with the mesh clipping into itself, which you can see right here. So we want to get rid of this overlapping area essentially. So this might take some doing, but all I'm going to do basically is with the smooth brush, kind of smooth this out so I can get access to this, and then re-inflate it with the inflate brush. And because my refine method is set to subdivide collapse, you see it's gotten rid of that overlap there. And now we just have a smooth transition. So small areas of, again, modifier errors like that can be fixed in sculpting. But if you have large areas or areas with like holes in them, that is something that does need to be addressed at the time of modeling. Going to widen these feet out a little bit more so they look a little bit more like they could support him. Okay. And the palm here needs a little bit more flesh to it. I'm actually going to do that with the draw brush, just on the outer edge here. Let's come in with the crease and try to define the thumb. The nice thing about doing hands is that you always have a reference right in front of you. Okay. Something I like to do to define the joints a little bit more is I'll come in with a draw brush over the top of the knuckle here. And this takes a little bit of back and forth work, but I think it's worth it. Just define that where your knuckles should be with the draw brush, and then you can come in with the crease brush on the other side and push it in to form a little bit of a bend and define the knuckle a little bit better. So now we just need to smooth it out and blend it in. And be really careful using the smooth brush on these sort of thin cylindrical sections here, as you can really lose a lot of mass very quickly. So just come in with a very light smoothing stroke. And you can always combat the sort of collapsing effect of the smooth brush by alternating it with the inflate brush. Make sure these areas in here are smooth and there's no weird pinching or overlapping. Okay. Okay, so we increased or decreased our detail size here, increasing our resolution. So let's go over and do the face once again with this smaller size. And I'm going to start pulling out the top part of the lip here with the draw brush and just blending it in. So we need to smooth this out a lot. And I want this to be pushed out more. Something vaguely like that. Let's pull these corners of this mouth in so we retain that sort of egg shape here. And let's do the bottom half now. Oops, we need a slower or a smaller draw size. We can do sort of a lip. And let's hit this with the crease brush over where we want the actual mouth to be. Now, a note about faces and mouths and things. If you are planning on having this character's mouth move when they talk or something like that, you will need to sculpt this character with their mouth completely open. I am not going to be doing any facial animations in this course, so I'm going to sculpt it closed, but just know that if you wanted to do facial animations, you would need a more advanced rig, and you would need to sculpt the character with their eyes closed and their mouth open. Because obviously if you sculpt it with it closed, there's no interior of the mouth that has been modeled for when you go to speak or open your mouth at all. Likewise, if you model your character with the eyes open here, there will be no lids to close over the eyes. So a note about that, we are not going to be covering facial animations in this course. It's a little bit outside the scope of this course, but just know that if you did plan on having facial animations, create your character with the mouth completely open and the eyes completely closed. So you may be wondering why I'm leaving the eyes as just plain sockets here. And that is because typically when you are creating characters, the eyes are a completely separate mesh that are just spheres or slightly elongated spheres, depending on, what level of realism you're going for. So how you would do the eyes is that you would push in the sockets here, and then you would hop out of Sculpt Mode briefly, and you would add Shift A to add a new UV sphere. I'm gonna rotate this sphere by axing the 90 degrees so that this sort of apex point is pointing forward, and this is gonna serve as like the marker for where our pupil would be. So what I'm gonna do is bring this up to approximately where it needs to be on the head, but keep it in the center of the mesh because we're gonna use a mirror modifier here, and mirror modifiers always will mirror around the point of origin. So if we leave the point of origin or the pivot right in the center of the head here, it will mirror properly and we just won't have to worry about it as much. So I'm going to scale it way in to about the size of an eyeball. Let's add our modifier right now. And before we move this any further, we are going to tab into edit mode so that we are leaving the origin where it is. So now if we move it in edit mode, when we move it apart, it'll split and create two spheres here, which we then just have to position roughly where we want the eyes to be. And we may have to come in and move these at a later date if they are not exactly right for our final mesh, but this will give you an idea of where your eyes should be for when you're going in and with your sculpt. Okay, so let's leave them right there for now. Let's return to our sculpt here. Seems... Okay, so let's return to sculpt mode, make sure dynamic topology is enabled still. And now that our spheres are in, we can come in and start sculpting around the eyes themselves to create the eyelids and things like that. You can sort of close up these holes. So, because you want to keep in mind that the portion of the eye that you see is only a small fraction of your actual eyeball. So the eye is much bigger than just this portion you see. So just like in real life, you want to create, when you're making these in 3D, you want to make the eyeball much bigger and then just only have a small portion of it showing. So I usually just sort of close up this area with the draw and then come in with the crease to do the eyelid. Okay, let's give some attention to this ear here. I'm just going to up-res it with the draw brush here. And the smooth brush, of course. Let's get the crease in to get this a little bit more defined. I'm trying to have my active tool here on the side here so that you can more easily see what brush I'm using, because sometimes it's hard to tell with these icons. So I apologize if I forget, but for the most part, I use just 3 or 4 brushes when sculpting. I'll use the grab brush, obviously a lot. I'll use the draw brush, the crease brush, the inflate brush, and that is the majority of my sculpting is just done with those few brushes. These brows are a little bit too intense, so I'm just going to raise them up to give him a nice, like, cartoonish arch to his brow here. I'm also going to push them in towards the head in this direction because they were feeling a little bit extreme. That's a little better. Okay, let's come in and sort of define the mask area. When I say mask, I mean, of course, the not the 3D mask painting that we're familiar with, but in a lot of cartoons, especially, we have this sort of hairline around that creates a mask, especially in animals. Like if you look at, like Mickey Mouse, for example, he has this sort of, you know, sort of 3 shape around the side of his face. So we're going to do something sort of like that. It's going to be a little bit different here. Gonna give him some chubby cheeks to make sure he's cute. Something like that. Coming in to smooth out the head here with the inflate brush and the smooth. If you want to preview this model with smooth shading on, you can definitely do that during the sculpting process. All you have to do is come here to the dynamic topology settings and click smooth shading, and that will get rid of all that faceting that you see here. I prefer to have the faceting on because it gives me more information about sort of the density and the tightness of my mesh. So for this actual shading portion, I do tend to leave that on, but if it bothers you to have it on, you definitely can smooth out your shading. Okay, so I need to fix the profile of this ear here, so I'm going to need to use the grab brush, but I don't want to affect the face because I like the changes I have made to the face so far. So I'm going to hit M to pull up the mask brush, and I'm just going to paint a mask out on the face. Increase the strength a little bit to make this go faster. Paint up the face and probably the back of the head. We don't want to worry about deforming that one too much either. Alternatively, instead of masking out the areas that you do not want to affect, you could also just mask out the areas you do want to affect. So if I just wanted to affect this ear, it might be faster for me to paint the ear out and then invert the mask. So you can do that. Let me finish painting it first. I just want to come in, maybe clean up some of this. Okay, so once I have the area that I want to change masked out, we can invert the mask here by coming up to Mask, Invert, or the shortcut right here is Control-I. So that will flip the mask, so now everything on the body will not be affected except for the ears. So I can come in with a grab brush and like a really large brush size and start fixing the shape of this and pulling it so it's pointed a little bit farther back without affecting anything around it. Okay, so that's more of an ear shape and profile, in my opinion. We do want them to stick out a little bit because this is, you know, a monkey character. Monkeys tend to have big ears. But they were pointing a little bit too forward. So here we can clear our mask with Alt-M. And there we have it. Okay, so I just need to do a little bit more work on the mouth here. And I think that is going to be good for the level of detail I want for this stage for the face. Remember, I don't want to go too high a detail because we still have to retopologize this, and any really fine detail we put in is going to be lost in the retopology process, and we're going to have to re-sculpt it. So I am going to change my refine method from subdivide to collapse to subdivide just to get this tight mouth crease in. With a crease brush, of course. And maybe fix the profile right here a little bit more with the inflate brush. Something like that. Okay, so I actually think this level of detail is pretty good for the head anyway. So we're gonna take a little break, and when we come back, we're gonna finish getting to basically this level of detail over the rest of the body. So I will see you in the next video. All right, so let's continue on with our first pass of sculpting for this character here. Now, we're pretty much set on the head, at least for this level of detail. One thing that I am going to change from my original design here is I'm going to leave out the tail. In my original design, I had a long tail here, but I found that it was making the rigging and animating process sort of unnecessarily complicated. So we can think of him as less like a monkey and more like an ape, I guess. So let's continue on just with our body sculpt here. I'm just going to start up-resing sort of in the back area. With the inflate and the smooth brush. And since we're not giving him a tail, we are going to give him a little monkey butt though. We'll give him little glutes. Something like that. Okay. Now, it matters more when you're going for a realistic style, but even when you are doing something more stylized such as this, you still want to think about how the muscles connect over the bones. So like in this area, we need sort of some mass to connect the stomach and the glutes to the thighs here. And we just want to think about how muscles tend to run down the legs. Again, we are going for something more stylized, so we're not going to be putting that much muscular detailing in. And it does matter more for realism, but whenever you're creating something that's, you know, humanoid, even if it's cartoony, you want to be basing these on real life proportions, even if you are exaggerating them, because it just tends to make your final result a little bit more believable. The knees were about there. So I just added a little mass to the front of the knees, and I'm gonna add a slight crease to the back of the knees just to accentuate it, just like we did for the fingers. And I kind of want to add a little crease right here to make it appear that this belly is sort of drooping over. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, let's come up and readdress these hands because we did a single pass on the knuckles, but we still have more work to do, especially in the palm of the hand. So I'm going to come in with the crease and just start adding these lines that you get in your palm, and you can always look at your hand as a reference for where the lines should go. Sometimes I turn on smooth shading just temporarily when I'm working on sculpts to see where I'm getting any like small scale lumpiness like this, and it helps me smooth it out. So I do tend to sculpt without smooth shading, but for certain areas I will turn it on temporarily. You can also turn it on like after you've finished your sculpt with the faceted faces or the flat shading turned on. It's always, you can come in as a final pass and make sure everything's smoothed out. I'm just changing the length of the fingers here a little bit. Just to even them out somewhat. Okay, I think that is probably pretty sufficient. Maybe this thumb is a little bit long. Again, we're not going to be seeing the character's hands in this super close up, so I'm probably not going to spend as much time on these as I would if this were like a first-person game or something like that. Typically, when you're creating for games, budgets and timetables tend to be pretty tight, so you want to really spend your resources and your energy on the things that are going to be seen by the player. So anything that's very close to the camera or is like an interactable object that the player is going to focus on, those are the things that should be getting the majority of your attention. Because this is like a platforming style game, the hands, although it's important that we have them and that they're well made, we're not really going to be animating them or anything, so I'm not going to spend as much time on these as I would for maybe a different style of game. For this style of game, it's more important that we get the overall form right, because if we think about it, we're going to be looking at our character mostly from like this angle. And then of course the face, because that's always the focal point when dealing with people or animals, is we tend to focus on their faces the most. I'm just adding a little detail to the bottom of the feet here. Again, not going to spend too much time on something like this, but you know, it's worth doing a little bit and making sure that it is good and it matches your concept and all that. So because my concept is an ape, we're going to give it sort of these hand-like feet. You know, complete with our palm lines here, or at least the suggestion of them. the toes to be a bit longer. So I'm just going to push in the connector points rather than pull out the toes themselves. I'm going to just pull up the suggestions of joints here in the toe as well, because if you look at feet resting on the floor, typically the toe isn't completely flat to the floor. There'll be a point here where it touches. It'll come up slightly in the center, and then the end will touch as well. So I'm just trying to replicate that as best as I can here. Having some issues with the weight distribution in the heel here. So I find if your characters look a little bit too much like they're floating rather than standing, I find that taking something like the draw brush and really lightly going around just the outer edges here can add the feeling of weight to your character. Because if you think about it, like the foot has all this mass down at the bottom, but when you're standing on a flat surface, that mass gets pushed up and out to the outside. So adding a little bit of mass right here can help the feeling of real weight to your character. And same thing, I'm going to add a little bit of mass to this outer portion right here. So unfortunately, there's not too much to say about what I'm doing here. It's basically just working with the mesh back and forth until you get forms that are, you know, aesthetically pleasing. I will say, however, that having some rudimentary anatomy knowledge can really help with this type of work, especially if you're interested in doing character work. You have to really know your anatomy, at least in the artistic sense, of to where the bones connect and where the muscles run and how they attach and all that. It's just very necessary for character work. Okay, so let's get a little bit more definition here in the back. Bring this up a little. Okay, let's look at it with smooth shading. Sort of on a whole, we have a little bit of faceting right here. Let's just smooth that out with the smooth brush. Okay, so you can obviously spend a lot more time getting your forms correct, but for the purposes of this course, I am satisfied with this result. So I am ready to move on to the next stage here, which is going to be to retopologize the model. So I will see you in the next video.